I never expected that my first week working as a temporary banquet server would end with a billionaire pointing at me as if I were some kind of spectacle. Yet that's exactly what happened on the marble floors of the Palm Crest Grand Royale, the most elite hotel in South Florida, a place dripping in Austrian crystal old money arrogance, and the kind of wealth that buys silence like it's an hors d'oeuvre. Grant Ellington, the 54-year-old real estate titan, whose face appeared on the covers of luxury magazines more than actual models, stood in the center of the ballroom, holding a $1,000 glass of champagne. His Armani suit shimmered under the chandeliers, the gold of his Rolex catching the light with every arrogant flick of his wrist. He was surrounded by Miami's elite people, who spoke loudly about charity, but quietly about their disdain for anyone beneath them. I was 26. My name was Serena Whitmore, and all I had wanted was to finish my shift, take home my modest tips, and help pay the rent for the cramped apartment I shared with my mother's old friend in Boca Raton. I never imagined I'd become the target of a man whose ego was bigger than the hotel itself. All I dared to do was politely mention to the event manager that the background music was a bit too loud for several guests. I said it gently, respectfully, with the professionalism drilled into me from years of working hard jobs. But Grant Ellington turned toward me with a slow, predatory smile, as if my existence personally offended him. "Oh," he said loudly, projecting his voice across the ballroom. "So our lovely staff now considers themselves experts in classical music." A ripple of laughter forced nervous spread through the crowd. My cheeks burned, but I kept my composure. That's something poverty teaches you early. Never let the powerful see you flinch. His daughter Aubrey Ellington stood beside him, 22, Juilliard-trained, draped in diamonds that could have funded a neighborhood. She let out a tight, snobbish giggle as he continued to look me up and down. "What's next?" Grant said, taking a step closer. "You watched a YouTube tutorial and decided you're ready to critique the greats." Aubrey smirked, the kind of smirk that came from generations of privilege. If only they knew. Music wasn't a hobby in my family, it was survival. My grandfather, August Whitmore, had played violin in the streets of Warsaw before the war tore his world apart. My mother taught piano in a public school in the Bronx until her illness made her hands tremble too much to play. And me, I had a secret that I guarded the way some people guard diamonds. Before I could answer, Grant leaned in, invading my space with the smirking confidence of a man who had never been told no. "You come in here wearing these cheap uniforms," he said softly, "but cold enough to freeze glass, and you think you can offer advice to people who live in a world you can't even imagine." My manager, Calvin Mercer, rushed toward us with panic in his eyes. Everyone at Palm Crest knew Grant Ellington's reputation, generous to the arts, yes, but also vindictive, ruthless, and capable of destroying careers with a single phone call. "Mr. Ellington, I sincerely apologize." Grant held up a hand sharply. "No, Calvin. Let the girl stay." His smile widened into something sharp and cruel. "In fact, let's make this interesting." The entire ballroom turned toward us, 50 pairs of eyes glittering with curiosity, discomfort, and the sick thrill of impending humiliation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grant announced, "our ambitious young employee seems to have opinions about classical music. Why don't we give her the chance to impress us?" Aubrey clapped with exaggerated delight.
"Oh, Father, you're terrible," she said, though she clearly enjoyed every second. My stomach twisted, but not with fear. Something else stirred, something old familiar, like embers catching fire. Grant gestured dramatically toward the concert black Steinway Model D in the center of the room. "If you can play better than my daughter," he proclaimed, who studied with the finest instructors in the world and performed at Wentworth Symphony Hall at 19, "then I will," he paused for effect, grinning, "marry you on the spot." The room erupted into shocked laughter. Phones lifted into the air. Someone whispered, "This is going viral." I stared at the piano, the glossy wood, the ivory keys, the memories. I hadn't touched a concert piano in years. My hands, rough from washing dishes and carrying trays, trembled slightly. But it wasn't fear, it was recognition. That Steinway called to me like a ghost from my childhood. Grant smirked as I stepped forward.
"What's the matter, losing your nerve?" What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my decision had been made 30 seconds earlier. A decision that would change not just this night, but my entire life. I walked toward the piano, slowly feeling the weight of the room fall into a hush. Even the servers froze in place. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. I adjusted the bench. My fingers hovered above the keys. And for a moment, for just a breath, I closed my eyes and saw my grandfather smiling at me across a tiny Bronx kitchen, whispering, "Play, Serena. Play your truth." Any requests, I asked calmly, surprising even myself. Grant chuckled. "Surprise us. Show us what the working class can do." So I did. I placed my fingers on the keys and unleashed a sound that cracked open the room. Rachmaninoff, Piano Concerto No. 2. A piece that devoured the weak and crowned the fearless. The first chords exploded like a storm rolling across the ocean. Several guests straightened in their seats. A gasp cut through the silence. I didn't play the notes. I breathed them. Every shift of tempo, every aching melody, every surge of emotion poured out with a force sharpened by years of heartbreak, resilience, and raw human survival. The room transformed, no longer a ballroom, but a battlefield of sound where every note landed like a revelation. Aubrey's smirk vanished. Grant Ellington's jaw tightened, his eyes darting around nervously. He knew this wasn't amateur talent. This was mastery forged by fire. When the final arpeggio soared upward like a rising flame, the room fell into absolute breathless silence. For almost 5 seconds, no one moved. Then an elderly man in the back, distinguished silver-haired, began to clap. Lysander Hale, artistic director of the Manhattan Philharmonic Orchestra. Within moments, the entire ballroom rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the hall, shaking champagne glasses and egos. I stood, wiped my palms discreetly on my apron, and stepped back. Grant Ellington's face had drained of color. Something had shifted, not just in the room, in fate itself. And this was only the beginning. The applause was still echoing off the crystal chandeliers when Lysander Hale stepped forward, tall, silver-haired, elegant, in a way that made even Palm Crest's wealthiest guests look suddenly small. His eyes stayed fixed on me with a stunned intensity, as if he were searching for cracks in what he'd just witnessed. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the calm authority of a man who had shaped some of the finest musicians in the world. "My dear," he said, ignoring Grant entirely, "that was extraordinary. Tell me, where did you study Curtis Juilliard? You must have had world-class training." Before I could answer, Grant cut in sharply, his voice slicing through the air. "Let's not get carried away. Anyone can rehearse a famous piece for years and pull off a decent performance." That sentence landed with the hollow sound of insecurity disguised as authority. He was scrambling, desperate to regain control of the spectacle he thought he owned. Aubrey tugged his sleeve in embarrassment, but he brushed her off. Lysander didn't even glance at him. "Serena," he insisted gently. "Where did you train?" I took a breath. "I learned from my mother. She taught in a public school in the Bronx. And from my grandfather, August. He survived things I can't even imagine, and still taught me that music could heal anything." A murmur rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "She's self-taught." Another said, "Impossible." Lysander smiled, not in disbelief, but in admiration. Genius rarely follows conventional paths. Aubrey Ellington's face tightened. Grant's jaw clenched. And suddenly, Lysander pulled a sheet of fresh music from his leather folio. "Then let's try something else," he said. "A composition no one here has ever heard. I received it this morning from a young composer in Prague. If you can read it on sight, it will tell us everything." "No," Grant snapped. This is ridiculous. We are not turning my charity gala into a circus." But Lysander had already placed the sheet on the piano. The room held its breath. I sat. My eyes skimmed the score, complex rhythms, shifting tones, unexpected melodic jumps. This wasn't a test for beginners. This was a trap designed to expose frauds. My heart didn't race. It steadied. Because for 8 years I had been doing exactly this, filling in for pianists who didn't show up, saving weddings, accompanying singers who forgot their key reading sheet music that arrived seconds before curtain time. I had lived in the world where improvisation and survival were twins. The moment my fingers touched the keys, the new composition unfurled, like water flowing around stone. The melody rose, then twisted into dissonance. then soared again with a rawness that pulled murmurs from places in the room that had been silent moments before. Lysander's eyes glistened. Aubrey's composure shattered into panic. Grant's face reddened from the collar upward. When the final note dissolved, silence settled thick and heavy. It was deeper than the silence after Rachmaninoff. It was the silence of realization, of shattered preconceptions, of a room full of people watching a truth they had never expected. Lysander exhaled shakily. In 40 years, I've seen 3 people play like that at first sight. Serena Whitmore, you're the 4th. Grant's voice cracked as he spoke. Talent is one thing. Paying rent is another. She's here serving drinks for a reason. This time I didn't hold back my reaction. I met his eyes, my voice steady. You're right about one thing, Mr. Ellington. I'm here working because life is expensive. But talent doesn't depend on money and respect doesn't depend on wealth. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Aubrey stepped forward furious. How dare you speak to my father like that? You're just enough. Lysander's command struck like lightning. And then another voice, calm but sharp, joined in. It belonged to Vivian Crestwood, the 50-year-old president of the Palm Crest Cultural Society and the hostess of the entire event. Tall, impeccably dressed, radiating authority, she walked toward me with the kind of reverence one would offer a rare artifact. Serena Whitmore will not return to her shift tonight, she said. She will not carry another tray, not here, not ever. Not after what we witnessed. Grant scoffed. Vivian, don't be absurd. I'm not being absurd, she replied coolly. I'm correcting an injustice. Before he could respond, Lysander stepped beside her. Vivian, earlier you mentioned the Manhattan Philharmonic's Young Artist Showcase at the Harrington Arts Hall next week. Vivian nodded slowly. Yes, and as fate would have it, one of our featured musicians canceled this afternoon. Lysander turned to me, his voice softer than the music I'd just played. Serena, would you like to perform in Manhattan next Friday? My breath caught in my chest. Harrington Arts Hall wasn't just a concert venue. It was sacred ground, the very air soaked in history. Grant exploded. Absolutely not. She's not ready for a stage like that. She'll crumble under real pressure. Aubrey looked at him with pleading eyes, silently begging him to stop digging deeper. But Grant's arrogance was too deeply rooted. I stood tall. I accept. The room erupted not with applause this time, but with shock. Lysander smiled. Excellent. I'll handle everything. Vivian squeezed my hand. You'll have the best coaches, the best support, the best everything. You won't walk into Manhattan alone. While they stepped aside to discuss logistics, Grant dragged Aubrey into a corner. His voice was low but venomous, like a man losing the one thing he worshipped most: control. She embarrassed me, Aubrey, he hissed, in front of everyone. I don't care how talented she is. No one humiliates me and walks away untouched. Aubrey trembled. Father, please, don't do something reckless. He ignored her. His eyes found mine again, and for the first time that night, I saw something darker than arrogance. I saw obsession. I saw revenge. I will be in Manhattan, he said loudly enough for the room to hear. And I will bring every critic, every journalist, every cultural vulture I know. When she fails, and she will, they'll tear her apart. He pointed at me as if delivering a curse. You challenged the wrong man, Serena, but he misread my silence. I wasn't afraid. I was awakening. And for the first time in my life, I felt the world shift beneath my feet, not away from me, but toward me. The next week would decide everything, and something deep inside whispered that this battle was far from over. Before I left the ballroom that night, I looked back once more. Grant Ellington glared at me with the fury of a man who believed he could shape fate with his bare hands. But he had no idea. I was no longer the girl who carried trays. I was the woman who carried a destiny. Now I just had to claim it. At least that's what I told myself until I realized that Manhattan would bring not just opportunity, but danger I never saw coming. Tell me, did you feel the tension rising between Serena and Grant as everything escalated? And do you want to see how Serena's first night in Manhattan will turn the entire story upside down? The week leading up to my performance at Harrington Arts Hall passed in a blur of rehearsals, late-night practice sessions, and moments when fear tried to claw at my determination. Vivian Crestwood surrounded me with a team of vocal coaches, performance mentors, and a wardrobe stylist who insisted that the music would sound even better if I wore something that made me breathe like a star. I didn't argue. I understood the truth presentation mattered to audiences long before the first note touched the air. But beneath the elegance, beneath the hours of preparation, something else kept growing inside me. A quiet fire. A certainty that this night wasn't just about proving Grant Ellington wrong. It was about proving to myself that I had never been small. On the night of the showcase, the Harrington Arts Hall pulsed with anticipation. More than 2,000 guests filled the velvet seats. The soft glow of stage lights filtered through the hall as critics sharpened their pens and whispered predictions. Some were eager, some were skeptical. Many had arrived because Grant personally invited them to witness what he assumed would be my downfall. Grant arrived last, flanked by Aubrey and a cluster of Palm Crest elites who had flown up from Florida. They entered like royalty. But the moment I stepped from backstage and walked toward the grand Steinway positioned at the center of the stage, all conversations fell away. I was no longer the girl who served champagne. I was the woman who had walked willingly into the lion's den, and I wasn't trembling. I sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed my hands on the keys. But instead of choosing Rachmaninoff, I played something different, something I had carried with me my entire life. An original composition built from the melodies my grandfather used to hum, shaped by the chaos and beauty of New York, fused with the jazz improvisations I learned during long nights in bars, where no one cared if I was talented as long as I could play. The opening notes drifted softly through the hall, tender as memory, fragile as breath. The audience leaned forward, drawn in not by grandeur, but by honesty. Then the piece expanded, weaving sorrow into hope, tension into release, each section a reflection of the life I had lived without anyone watching. The hall fell under the weight of sound. People cried quietly. Some gasped as the melody transformed again, climbing higher, braver, fuller, until it reached a crescendo that made the air tremble. And in the middle of that final swell, I saw him, a figure moving slowly down the central aisle. Elderly, slightly bent, but unmistakable. My grandfather, August Whitmore, alive. Tears burned my eyes as he reached the edge of the stage and stopped looking up at me with pride that felt almost mythic. The final notes poured from me like truth, finally given shape. When the last chord faded, silence stunned the entire hall. 5 seconds of breathless stillness. Then the applause came like thunder. People rose to their feet in waves. They clapped until the hall shook. 5 minutes passed and still they clapped. The critics who had come ready to tear me apart now looked at me with awe. Even Grant seemed frozen, his hand gripping Aubrey's arm with more force than necessary. Lysander Hale came on stage, lifted my hand and said clearly for the entire hall to hear, "Tonight you witnessed the arrival of a true American artist." But the night wasn't finished. August climbed the steps onto the stage. I rushed to him, and when he wrapped his arms around me, I felt 8 years of grief melt into something warm and whole again. He told the audience how I had sacrificed my scholarship, how I had worked 3 jobs to take care of my mother, how music had been both my burden and my salvation. People cried openly. Then he turned toward Grant's section of the audience and said without a hint of fear, "A man tried to shame my granddaughter last week. But what he didn't understand is that real talent survives everything. It cannot be crushed. It cannot be bought." The cameras turned. The entire hall turned. Every eye locked onto Grant. And for once he had no defense, no arrogance, no power to hide behind. He looked small, smaller than he had ever made me feel. After the show, reporters crowded around. Critics wrote reviews filled with words like breathtaking and historic and transcendent. That same night, offers poured in: recording contracts, residencies, collaborations. But I didn't care about any of it. All I cared about was the simple, indescribable feeling of finally being seen for who I truly was. 3 weeks later, as I stayed temporarily in a friend's apartment in the Bronx, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, Grant Ellington stood there holding a crumpled envelope, his expression stripped of pride. He said he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He admitted he didn't deserve it. Then he handed me the envelope, a check worth more than 10 years of elite musical education, a sum so large it made my breath catch. But I gave it back, not out of anger, out of clarity. I told him that if he truly wanted to make amends, he could use that money to fund music programs in poor neighborhoods for children who had the same fire I did, but none of the opportunity. He accepted. And for the first time since I met him, I saw something like humility appear in his eyes. 6 months later, I signed with a major classical label. My debut album hit the charts. I created the Whitmore Foundation, dedicated to giving young musicians a chance to be heard. My grandfather stood in the front row of every performance, and Grant. He disappeared from high society, but reappeared in community centers and school auditoriums, fulfilling the promise he made. My life didn't become perfect, but it became mine, and that was enough. If you felt something while reading this, tell me, did you feel that Serena truly earned her victory after everything she survived? And do you believe someone like Grant can ever genuinely change when life forces them to confront their own darkness? If this story touched your heart, please comment 100 below. Tell me which country you're watching from and share this story so more people can be inspired by it.